Hello, I'm S.A. I'm the creator and the artist of the dark fantasy comic, Wingless, the Dovecoat Princess. I make this comic along with our writer, Ash Goggles, who was officially appointed writer at the beginning of Chapter 3, and Farazan, who I guess is kinda like our salesperson slash HR guy. Yeah. This video will go over the origins of the comic, since the majority of votes went to that option. So first, let's start with some history. I've played multiplayer online games since I was probably 9 years old, and my first Korean MMO was Ragnarok Online, which is a sprite-based game that started hosting North American servers in 2003. Most of my life's work has come from playing Ragnarok Online on and off through my teenage years, and it's the source of where the first inklings of the comic came from. I had made a couple things previous to the comic that involved inspiration from Ragnarok Online, the most prominent being an RPG Maker game that I started in 2004 called Mirror Blue. It featured characters from Ragnarok in a made-up world that I did, and was about an alchemist who created a homunculus that wanted to destroy the world. Which, as you probably could have guessed, I drew some inspiration from Full Metal Alchemist for it as well. It was the first instance of turning characters from an MMO that I played into a story, and I continue to do this for pretty much every game that I played. Anyway, because of this game, I got some experience in making games, even if it was just a shitty engine like RPG Maker, which was RPG Maker 2003, so that's really fucking old. But it made me have more confidence when the time came for the Ragnarok Online server. Now, I had said that I spent my teenage years playing various MMOs, most of which were just hopping from one Ragnarok private server to another. I grew really bitter about the quality of low-rate servers, and how they would often have nothing interesting or new about them, even when the admin had the power to change the whole server at the tips of his fingers, and add new NPCs or quests or just stuff to do. Because Ragnarok was largely grind-based, I thought it would be fun to make a server that was more quest and story-based, that you followed along and did said quests with other players. So I downloaded the Eafina emulator for Ragnarok and got shit going in hopes that my dream would one day come true. Spoiler, it didn't. So the original start date of this project was probably a little time before February of 2009. That's an estimate, because I have zero documentation of anything prior to 2009, which was when I started my server's wiki to keep track of my progress. The reason I failed was because my scope was enormous for a single guy to take on. It involved making an entirely new world, filled with new maps and new NPCs, and at that time, the technology to make new maps in Ragnarok was very arduous, very buggy, very broken. I spent most of my time coding pointless minigames instead of tending to the actual story, which was an amorphous clusterfuck that had no end or middle, only a beginning. I had no idea what I was doing with it. I would make shit up as I went and hope that it worked well with other things. The other problem with the story is that there was only a single villain that was somehow in 4 different places at the same time, wrecking shit up in each country, which makes absolutely no sense. Eventually, I figured this wasn't working, and I looked for a way to salvage my work. I tried thinking of many things to move the story in order to tell it. Like a book, a single-player game, browser game, and there was the most feasible and least barred entry, a webcomic. Now, prior to this, the only webcomics I had read were now long dead ones from my teenage years. I hadn't read anything since then. I stumbled upon a few by chance, and I started reading them and became inspired enough to go, hey, I guess I should do this as well, since I suck at everything else. And so I went! The problem was transferring the story to a book format. In an MMO, the story is about the player character. There is no player character in a comic, so I had to think of something to cover that base. The player character stand-in actually became Lily. Then I needed a protagonist to follow around. Ophelia, who I'll elaborate in a bit, became the protagonist as she was the NPC that was the most important in the original story. A lot of the NPCs still exist in the comic story, but they don't have generic backstories anymore, and they don't exist merely to give the player experience points. Now about those NPCs, most of them went through an enormous amount of change, both physically and personality-wise, now that I made them actual humans and not guys who tell you to kill 5 rats. Ophelia had to be the most frustrating person to change. She had 0 personality as an NPC, was very generic, and just generic nice. Her only goal was to quote-unquote find more about her ancestor, which is like the most vague goal ever. I have no idea how she would even accomplish that and know that she's accomplished that. There's no end to it. She was extremely boring and always just conveniently seemed to solve plot-related issues with a bullshit excuse that I made up. Anyway, after struggling for a long time trying to figure out something for her, she finally got a goal to become a knight, and her backstory and personality followed suit. Instead of being generic nice, she became an energetic, impulsive, but stubborn girl whose naivety costs her a lot, but also forces her to learn. Her looks didn't actually change too much. I made her younger than her MMO counterpart in the story because it was really weird to have a 22-year-old girl be so clueless. Next is Magnus, Ophelia's royal paladin older brother. He had less change than her, but still made it out relatively the same as he was before with some differences. He used to be kind of a dickhead in the game and would say rude things unprovoked for no reason. He became less of an asshat and more stern and withdrawn. He also used to be Ophelia's vassal rather than her brother. This was changed because I wanted a story about sibling love and caring about each other, because that melts my frigid stone heart like butter in a hot pan. While Ophelia's physical appearance didn't change much, Magnus was a fucking disaster. Mostly because at the time, I had no idea how to design armor. So, based on how I drew it previously, he actually couldn't bend his knees. He had like 5 or 6 different designs before settling on the current one, which honestly I still want to change, but I'll try not to. Buchan! Okay, funny story about him. I can't speak French, so I looked up how to pronounce its name. I came up with Buchan. I don't know where I saw that, but I rolled with it. Now, no one would normally know that I've been pronouncing it wrong this entire time, since it's actually Buchan, but I voiced Ophelia for my Skyrim mod, and I've probably said its name wrong in like 20 different lines.
I traveled here with my companion, Buchan. Buchan is this grumpy book here. Buchan, say hello, will you? Buchan would be more than delighted to be your friend. Buchan can only write in itself. Surely, Buchan can become a best-selling author someday.
Now I look like an idiot. But that mod is old as shit and outdated, so I can just go like,
well, it's not canon, so it's okay!
And hopefully hand-wave my ignorance away. As for Buchan's story, it was originally just a regular book. It wasn't alive or anything. I thought to myself, man, there's no other characters for a long-ass time. I need another character. And Farazan goes, well, in the spirit of Bleach saying swords are now characters, how about books are now characters? And then Buchan was born as a sentient book. And while doing research about sentient books and stories, I also have wedding dates planned with various other book characters such as Lebram from Soul Sacrifice and my favorite, Grimoire Weiss from Nier. Aleph the Mercenary. Now, a pronunciation about her name. Her original name used to be spelled Aleph, which I changed to Alif to look more Arabic. The actual correct pronunciation of it is Aleph, like Alice, but I've said Aleph for so long. I honestly don't give a shit about the correct way to say it, and it's now Aleph forever. Her appearance I actually shamefully stole from a default portrait in Ragnarok. I like that pink hair and braids so much that I put it on the current Aleph and went, "Well, it's hair dye!" to justify it. As for her being Drow, we really didn't have any other major Drow characters, so it just kind of fit with her steadfast and hardy nature. Her old personality made her out to be very airheaded and young. It was almost embarrassing how dumb she was. Like, she was a caricature or an anime stock trope or something. I don't even think she had a backstory. She was really neurotic and freaked out about Jay a lot. She also used to be this other Impalnian guy's lover, I guess, which I didn't know or remember until I looked at her old character sheet. Jay, the medic. His original name wasn't Jay, but Vise, because I played Skies of Arcadia as a kid, and I liked that name. After I did some reworking of Impalnians, he needed a new name, which I got from one of my favorite K-pop singers, Jay Park. His old portrait was the default one in-game, and when I made his character design, he was really ugly. Like, really ugly. It took some iterations to make him less ugly. Anyway, his old personality was this pathetic wuss invertebrate that was a rogue and was bad at lying. He was so distrustful to people that he wouldn't even tell them his own name and would freak out about conspiracy theories. I don't know what his goal was, other than to get dishonest money to give to Aleph. That's about as far as his character went. But one thing that didn't change is that him and Aleph have been partnered since the beginning. As for Lily, not much to say about him that isn't spoilers, other than you already know, he's what the player character turned into as the actual character. Now, back then, the world was very different. I had it divided into maps, rather than any sense of biomes or territories, based on the countries and whatnot. I still had 4 races back then, but they also got some changes as the story went on. Impalnians used to be called elves. Yes, they had pointy ears, and no, they still couldn't use magic. They were actually the last race I figured out for their history and traits, and there is a reason why they have 4 arms, other than me saying they need some kind of visual indicator, which is a spoiler, and I can't say, sorry. Atavi used to be angels, that was their name, and I changed this because I was mad that I couldn't use the adjective angelic without it being weird. They used to have trained wolves that did stuff for them because they were lazy. I don't know how they get a wolf for every citizen, but it made 0 sense, considering they didn't live in grass huts or anything, and their city was actually grandiose and beautiful, and I'm pretty sure wolves don't have opposable thumbs. They also used to have a queen, and now it's an empress. Drow used to be called devils, because, yeah, angels, devils, yeah. They haven't actually changed at all, other than adding horns. They're basically the same. Lastly, Aryans didn't change much, other than historically, and the relationship between them and Atavi became more important. They also became less white, and they are now tall and tan, to contrast the small and pale Atavi. Now, that's the bulk of the exterior changes. As you might have guessed, the rest of the story changed in a huge way, which I obviously can't say because spoilers. But I like to revisit my old work from time to time and just see how much things have changed and how bad my art was back then. And in like 3 years, I'm probably gonna do the same to what I have right now. I mean, I already gag when I look at the first few pages of the comic and I'm like, what the fuck is this shit? What the fuck is this? Who drew this? It's terrible. Jesus Christ. So, I hope this video was interesting to you, and that you enjoyed learning about the history of the comic. As always, if you like our comic and want to support us, you can always pledge to us on Patreon. Patreon? Honestly, I don't know how to say that word, I'm sorry. You can pledge to us on Patreon for as little as 1 freedom unit per month for cool stuff. This comic will always be free, and we thank our current supporters for their cash month's contribution to the carpal tunnel empire. See you soon!